Everyone. It's Friday. I'm going to say it's Friday every single time because that was the
I
title
know.
that
I
never
know.
happened.
Yeah,
You
we know.
started saying it before the show even existed, so yeah,
It's
I'm not
Friday.
surprised.
My name's Daniel, and these are my two co-hosts, Agatha and Steve. I don't know if I'm pointing in the right direction. Agatha and Steve, and you're watching the wrap-up. And right now we are full of Asian food. Sorry, Jeremy. We are.
Me, I'm starving. No,
Jeremy's starving.
Hopefully, my food will get here within an hour. Unless
Oh.
I suspect the dude might have eaten it himself. Like that's
Oh.
always a possibility.
off to
Brutal.
off to a brutal start for this stream.
Brutal.
But this week we're joined by our recurring guests, Emma, Jeremy, and Anamalie. I'm so excited to have all of y'all back. We've been, talking for. Don't worry, Anamalie, I'm not putting you on the spot. You can. We've been talking for like the past week about the topic of food in tabletop RPGs. And we've seen it and we've talked about it like on and off on the stream when Steve and I were reading, Oriental Adventures with all of those amazing people who joined us. Chopsticks were included as a weapon and were listed as a weapon in Oriental Adventures. When we were reading the Caritur section of Oriental Adventures, there's literally a section that says the common greeting in Caritur was, "Have you eaten rice today?" So we've talked about food kind of tangentially, but we've
Agatha,
never.
did you not know that?
Sorry.
You okay?
Yo! Oh,
Okay. Do you need to unpack a little bit here?
have you eaten rice today?
Yeah.
No.
So,
Okay, but legit though, like
Yeah,
in
it's-
Taiwan, you
Yeah,
say
it's
that
just-
in
it's-
Taiwanese
yeah, it's just
as a
Chinese.
yeah,
greeting to each
it's like,
other.
yeah.
Yeah.
it was like, have you eaten, like chulama, like have you eaten, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like, but it's like they say all of. So okay, to put this into more context,
Yes, please contextualize for
Car-
me.
Car-
It's like that in
Caritur-
old L5R also.
well, Caritur is not China. Caritur is all of East Asia. So that's basically saying all Asians eat rice, and that all Asians are like, "Yo, what's up, Emma? Have you eaten rice today? What's up,
I have,
Annabelle?
yes.
Have you eaten rice today?"
Nope.
Yeah, it misses how like language is like words, but also how people parse words.
Right,
Like beyond words, there is communication,
right,
and instead it's like, no, just look how exotic these people are, and
right.
Have you eaten
fun-
rice today?
They ask if you've eaten rice today. It's so
Yeah.
different than how we say more efficiently hello.
It's the same. It's the same as saying like, well, honor is a concept in Asia, therefore it's not problematic, right? Saying that all Asians have honor or are motivated by honor can be problematic, but the concept of honor isn't. Just like the concept of rice isn't. Rice is, pretty widespread, but to say that all Asians eat rice or that rice is the social fabric of all Asian interactions is super problematic. And I think that's a way of kind of articulating my anguish related to that particular part of Oriental Adventures.
Right. That's fair.
But that said, that's the topic of this week's stream, or if you're watching it on YouTube, episode 2 of the wrap up. We're going to be talking about food, D&D, TTRPGs, but the wrap up is a little bit different from our previous streams, Asians Read or Critical Read. It's more casual. If you noticed, if you joined us live, we've been sitting here for half an hour eating food. Sorry, Jeremy.
Okay.
So sorry.
Yeah.
Our fault.
We've been sitting here for the past half hour eating food. This is a place for us to have casual conversations about these topics. So every week what we usually do is we talk about like a new TTRPG or a current game we're playing or even a video game, and we'll make like a recommendation. Last week, we might have put a little bit too much time into that discussion. So I think this week what we can do is we could all share one thing, something you're super excited about or something that you're playing or are reading or are working on. And then we can kind of move into the topic, giving us more time to talk about, Caritur, Caritur noodles, and the Heroes Feast D&D cookbook, which is what we're going to be referencing pretty heavily, at least for the initial part of the conversation. So I'll start by talking about something that I'm working on. I'm working on not really like a game concept, but maybe a show concept that I want to try on Asians Represent. I've been watching a lot of like spy action thriller movies and TV shows. I just watched Anna, which is not very good. Don't watch it.
But the one about
The Russian spy, and it's a Luc
the
Besson
Russian
movie.
spy. I was thinking of another one. Isn't there one starring like?
Atomic Blonde.
No, I was
is
thinking
good.
of a Scarlett Johansson movie.
Oh, that's
oddly
Lucy.
enough.
That's Lucy.
Lucy, where she starts out in Taiwan in
Yeah.
Taipei, and she
uses
implanted
her
herself-
entire brain.
Yeah,
Uses
and
her
the
whole brain.
My first thought when watching that movie was like, there's no like expat that can afford this apartment that she's living in Taipei. Like, that was my first thought when I watched that film.
But ScarJo's Asian. So
Yeah,
she's
ScarJo's
basically
Asian.
a local.
Never mind. Yeah, not an expat. Yeah, honorary.
Not an
Asian.
expat. What are you talking about? But yeah, so I've been watching a lot of like spy stuff, and action thrillers. I've also been watching the Alex Rider show on Amazon Prime. Surprisingly good.
Really?
Yeah, surprisingly. I never read the books because I guess too old for when they
I
were
own
like
the
a big
books.
thing. And so I've been working on a concept for this, Asian. This, you remember last episode we were like secret Asians. I've been working on a concept for a sort of international private intelligence supernatural fighting agency, and a show that would revolve around that. And I had this idea on how to do session zeros and session 0.5s before the session 1. And this concept that I've been working on is actually using different micro RPGs catered to the specific character concepts that the players want to use. So for instance, if a player wants their secret agent to be an assassin, I want to use this micro RPG called Excommunicado, which is based on John Wick. And it's like a 1-to-1 RPG about an assassin who has been excommunicated from their order. But my ideas with these session zeros, the individualized ones, is that each session zero is a standalone story for that one player. And at the end of every session zero, they get an invitation. Their character gets an invitation to meet at this location.
Mm-hmm.
And at our session 0.5, all the characters meet at that one location, and they're all introduced to each other, each of them with this fleshed out backstory and their own unique interaction with the supernatural. And that's what I want to do.
Oh, I love that.
Sounds dope as hell.
But I think what I'm going to do is test out the idea in like a friend game. So I've been talking to some people in our server about doing this. So I really want to try it because I think that it would make a really cool sort of backstory for each character and create some depth for them before we throw them into this conspiracy.
Would you? So if this was a formal show, would you release the session zeros, like the one-off stories, as audio too?
Yes, of course.
Nice.
So it would be like, it wouldn't be called Secret Asians, but it would be called Secret Asians.
I think it should be called Secret Asians.
I think that's, yeah.
Weren't you the one, Steve?
Right,
Weren't you
It was
the one?
100% was me.
It would be called Secret Asians, Part 1.
Nice black Asians.
Oh, I'm not gonna do that one. Not gonna do that one. But yeah, it would. I think I would release each one. It would be like session 0, Steve, or session 0, Agatha, and just release them in order. And then it would be session 0.5, the meetup. It was like a mini series. Maybe we'll do this for when we start like a Patreon or something. I don't
love
know.
that idea.
Because
I
I
love that
really want to develop this over time, and then when we have these backstories, I can start doing session zeros with other people who might be guest stars and have their own, introduction to the world. How did you get? You know how in stories are like, well, how did you first get introduced to the supernatural? And you're just like, oh, well, they killed my partner, and now I'm seeking revenge. But that story never actually happened. So I want that story to happen in a game where they have this vivid detail that they can draw upon, or these like different unique understandings of the supernatural and how the government or how the world works around them. But yeah, that's my idea.
Nice.
So yeah, that's my thing for the week. That's what I've been kind of like working on this week. What is everyone else like? Who wants to go? Steve.
Steve always wants to go. So I've been reading. Oh, it's covered in food. So I've been reading this philosophy book on.
Dao De Ching. Yeah. Wow.
So it's Dao Ting Xing is the kind of Lao Tzu's Book of the Way of the Righteousness, and I'm 4 lines in, not even 4 pages in. I'm 4 lines in, and that's about as far as I got all week. It's very, very heavy, and the reason I'm reading is because I had read some Fosse books by John Haidt around kind of morality and how people construct their moral backbone. And what I realized was that a lot of my morality is entrenched in basically white, educated, Western upbringing. And so I'm looking to deconstruct it a little bit. And the way I'm going about it is reading this, and it's hurting my brain. I feel like my brain is going to melt down. It's going to form into a cocoon. It's going to rearrange itself. And at the end of it, I'm going to have some kind of weird butterfly. That is the hope.
I applaud you reading that by choice. I had to read it in college to get my
That sounds real
Asian
bad.
studies degree, and it was I had to write papers on it. I don't remember much, but it was tough.
I had to read the Analects, but not.
I had to read the Analect. Yeah, I had to read the Analects too.
I read that in high school. I don't know
Yeah.
why.
And then what? I took a classical Chinese course at one point when I was living in Taiwan, and I read parts of the Analects in Chinese, and that was the worst. Like,
Yeah, no
No.
thanks.
that was the
No,
absolute
I'm good.
worst.
I'm good. Pass.
Yeah.
So
What is-
so Agatha, I know that you had to bounce quickly, but we're just kind of talking about what we did this week, something we want to shout out, be it like an awesome creator, or like a game you've been really enjoying or a reading. I talked about my Secret Asians concept.
We need a theme song.
We need a theme song. Secret Asian.
Asian man.
You got it.
Wait,
We'll just
what
license
is
it. It's fine.
what is the Analects?
It's Confucius.
Confucius's book.
Just
Yeah.
Confucius
The
stuff.
teachings
Oh.
of Confucius.
Yeah. It's just
Oh
like
yeah.
just going
like-
over like everything that he wrote in his life and his opinions
Yeah.
on the world, pretty much.
It just
That
seems
later
like him
became
sitting-
Confucianism.
It seems like him just sitting in the garden, saying anything that comes to his mind. But yeah,
Yeah,
So-
I remember having to memorize a part of it when I was in elementary school in Taiwan,
Oh damn.
and I just didn't understand anything. that I
Yeah,
was-
it's same with me. Like, especially like having to translate it from like classical to modern Chinese, and still being like, okay, I don't really understand this. But
Yeah.
it was. I wouldn't say it was a bad experience, but it was a tough experience.
That's fair.
I have my copy of it somewhere. I don't.
I have another thing I
I
want to
know,
shout
yeah.
out. Steve and Agatha, am I allowed to have 2 things to shout out?
Yeah, you're the producer. You can do what you
They're
want.
my co-hosts.
Don't
Um,
encourage it.
I just want to shout out Star Wars having more Asian representation, slowly
yeah.
moving forward.
I think that's
With
really
the latest episode of The Mandalorian, and potential new series. That's it. That's all I have to say. Who wants to go next? So we got Agatha, Emma, Adam Ali. I said Emma twice, and Jeremy. What did you do this week? What's something you recommend? What's something awesome, or something that you're like happy about in our gaming space?
I can go.
Yeah.
I finished a campaign. Well, not really a campaign. It was more like a 3-shot that got really extended out because of holidays. We were only able to play once a month. But I think I mentioned on our Asians Recommend stream that I was coming up with a new Yokai Hunter Society adventure. And I just finished that 2 days ago. And it was basically this adventure where the protagonists had to go into Yoshiwara, which was Tokyo's most famous old red light district back in the day. And they were tasked with basically investigating these brothels that were secret hiding places of yokai. And they ran into like a Rokurokubi, which is like the long-necked kind of, long-necked woman who can stretch her neck. And the Nukekubi, which is the variant that preys upon human blood. And the Rokurokubi was actually like a high-ranking oiran, like a high-ranking sex worker in Yoshiwara, and she tasked them with, finding another Rokurokubi who was trapped in another brothel house and kind of stuck in this terrible contract. And so it turns out that brothel house was run by like an oni, and there was an oni masquerading as a man. There were all these shenanigans happening. But basically, in order to write this scenario, I did all this research into like sex work and Yoshiwara, what it was like back in the late 1800s. And so it was a lot of fun. My players really enjoyed it. I was a little bit nervous running it because obviously it was talking about, sex work, and I was playing with a bunch of dudes, and I was not quite sure how some of them would react, whether they'd be immature or not. But everyone was really into the story and was quite mature with, interacting with the NPCs in a way that was not just like, oh, we're surrounded by prostitutes. Let's get up some shenanigans. No, they actually did a great job playing it.
Nice. Yeah, I remember you mentioned prepping for that during our L5R streams.
Yeah, it was basically just like a lot of research on Wikipedia, reading some old books, what was sex work like in, Tokyo in like the 1890s. I think it's one of those things that if you kind of do the homework, you can really open your eyes up to the history, and there's so many great stories for a campaign just in history itself.
Yeah, I think doing historical research is really just a great way to flesh out your stories, to make them feel more real, even if they're historical or even if they're modern. Honestly, doing a lot of research into, like, if you want to set your adventure in Chinatown, learn about the Chinatown in that city, learn about its history, learn about the restaurants there. It just makes it feel alive.
And history can be weirder or more exciting than anything you can come up with on your own.
Yeah.
or really much of the stuff that we're looking at in D&D is based on history, or any other TTRPG. L5R is loosely based on history or mythologies. Loose.
It's a number of historical concepts put together in a way that does not necessarily make sense, and many of them are misinterpreted.
Exactly. The lack of research results in that.
They are inspired by history.
So, Adam, now, while we have you talking, what have you played this week, or what would you recommend?
It's a good question. So for those who do not know, I have ADHD, which means sometimes I hyperfixate. It's been a long time since that happened, but it has happened this week, where I played a game and I could not stop unless it was to go to bed or go to the bathroom. It's very frustrating at times. It's not as cool as it seems. Anyway, the game is actually pretty good. It's called Control. I played it and its 2 DLCs, or expansions. Sorry. It's about a woman named Jessie Faden, who becomes director of this paranormal bureau, who looks into, the paranormal weird accounts that they call AWEs, where various dimensions cross with ours, causing huge amounts of damage. And it's about her story to uncover more about her past, because she was involved in an AWE as a kid, and it's a very good, very fun game. The combat is super varied because of the tools you can use. Like, I recommend it. I will say, as a word of warning, that there's about 3 people of color in the entire game, which is not much. And it shows at times. However, overall, it's a very fun game. I also really recommend the AWE DLC, which is a crossover with Alan Wake. Because it suddenly turns into a bit of a horror game, and I really appreciate that. Like, they took the same concepts that were in the main game, the playability is still the same, but they start playing with light and dark and fun aspects. And there's this great scene where you're running through a corridor, but you have to go from light source to light source because otherwise you're going to get attacked. And it is super tense because these light sources are constantly flicking on and off. Like, it was a bit horrifying, and I really do appreciate that, because that's a hard thing to put into an action game and have it blend seamlessly. So overall,
Alan Wake crossover, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty
I mean,
sweet.
it's made by the same studio.
Alan Wake, the game that was delisted due to music licensing problems for like years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why it wasn't on Steam or anything, because it was because of one song in the game they just couldn't get the rights to for digital distribution.
Oh, damn. That sucks.
Yeah.
Alan Wake games are fun. That being said, Agatha or Emma, who wants to go next? Or if you don't have anything to share, that's also all right.
I don't have anything specific to share. It's been a lot of wrapping things up this week. But I would like to point out that I had a conversation with an old friend that her nibblings are into D&D now. They are relatively young, but she has noticed that the content of D&D is not necessarily fantastic. So I told her to keep an eye on questlings,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
Banana Chan is a friend of the podcast.
yeah, and then I'm gonna like later ask if you have any suggestions for kids that are under 10. But like, you don't have to say here. We can talk about it after.
My Little Pony: Tales of Equestria.
Mhm.
Quest, just the game Quest
Yeah.
that we play. I've got some stuff. I'll send it to you after.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, there's also, I think it's like No Thank You Evil. I think that's
Yep,
another
that's
one.
Yep, that's another
I
one.
like that title.
I wrote a
Yeah.
game called Zany Zoo.
Yeah.
There's also like other like third-party D&D stuff that might be more appropriate for children, like non-official stuff. Like I think like Humblewood, where like you play, it's like Redwall. You play as like little
Mhm.
animals in a
Oh,
forest.
Yep.
Like you can be like a little owl paladin, and it looks really cute. Look it up. The art, I think, and the themes might be more suitable for someone under the age of 10.
You can do
Great,
Pugmire
yeah.
as well.
Pugmire, yeah, we play dogs. We play
Yeah.
Pug.
Yeah.
The cats are all evil, as they are.
Anyways, yeah.
We could do a whole stream on like gaming with your family.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Yeah, we should do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my thing.
oh yeah, go ahead, Agatha. Sorry.
No.
No. Go.
Continue. I often interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
Okay, so the thing that I've been reading this week, I've been getting back into reading Japanese murder mysteries, but mostly with murder in it. I'm really into their kind of, I think it's what is it called? Like the kind where it's like the genre that developed out of like classic golden age mysteries. There's like a word for it that
I
It's
have
fine.
no idea.
where
Yeah,
they
I don't
focus on like have like the puzzle itself, and that the reader needs to be able to get all of the clues as well as the detective in the story, if there's a detective, and then
I looked it up. It's like
who done it?
Aizen says
Honkaku, yeah.
Honkaku.
Yeah.
Honkaku.
Yes. Yeah, so like fair play mysteries, I think is the right translation for it. Yeah, thank you. And I really like those kind of mysteries. I'm not good at solving puzzles, but I just like reading about people who are good at it. And I've been getting back to Higashi no Keigo, or Keigo Higashi no, and his more recent stuff is less so like that. They're more about like the human condition, the human psyche, like what is crime, what is humanity, like things like that. But his old stuff, he has a couple of series. One of them is Detective Galileo. I'm really getting into this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I love
Never
this.
apologize for getting into something like that.
I remember when it came out as a Japanese drama, and I watched it and I was like, this is so cool. And then I started reading it. But so there's like a short story collection that I don't think is translated into English. I've been reading it in Chinese, and it's really fun, except it has a lot of science in it, because the main character, he's like he's an assistant professor, and I think in like physics. So then like a lot of the crimes have to do with like natural phenomenon that he would like explain with all these like terminology that I have to keep translating on Google, because I'm like, first of all, I don't know what this is. It's in Chinese. And then I translate it, I'm like, okay, second of all, I still don't know what this is when it's
So you're
translated
learning
to English.
physics as well.
I am.
It's like
I'm
my friend
learning-
who tried to read the three-body problem in Chinese. It's just like, oh my god,
Why?
Without any annotations.
His Chinese is great, but
Oh, okay.
it's just such technical vocabulary that
Yes.
your Chinese can be great, but he's ultimately not like a native speaker or someone familiar with a lot of things. You probably still need to look up in English, even reading the English version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I recommend, if anyone wants to read mysteries, I recommend, Higashino Keigo's stuff. Oh, Higashino is his last name, I guess. Anyway, but yeah, there's like quite a few that are being translated into English, so that's more accessible.
He wrote a book called The Miracles of the Namiya General Store that I saw in like a Kinokuniya once and really wanted to buy just because of the cover art.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm very
Yeah,
much
not-
like that when it comes to books. I just buy books based on the cover, which has led
I'm
to
guilty.
some very unsmart purchases and some lucky ones.
Same thing with graphic novels and comics in general.
Yeah, it's
and
a
then
problem.
you realize that like cover art is not always the interior art, and
I hate that trick.
I hate
gotta
that
say.
so much. Oh, Todd McFarlane did the cover. What's the interiors?
Or when they re-release something with a really nice new cover, and it's like, I'm literally just
Yeah.
buying this because of the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I could do a whole stream where I just talk about my favorite TTRPG covers.
We should do that.
That's a good idea.
I've got some.
That's a different stream. We could do that. I think, are all of us returning next week? Because next week we're talking about Cyberpunk.
I think
Played
you
it
have-
for an hour, just making a character.
I think
Still-
you have a lot of people.
Nice.
There were a lot of people. I think we got Kiena. I got to reach out to Kiena. Jeremy's going to do it. And then somebody that Agatha recommended.
Yeah.
So I can
Jamie.
sit out because
Yeah.
I have consumed Cyberpunk themed stuff, but I don't have any hot takes or anything that will add. So
Emma,
Someone
you're
can
the
take my
most
place.
punk out of all of us.
Yeah, Emma.
I don't know about that, man.
Punk turtleneck.
This knitted tan
That's
color
punk
This
in
knitted
2020.
tan color. Yeah.
with my rack of handmade socks in the background. Hell yeah.
So punk.
Pretty
Look,
punk.
you don't want to give the corporations money, so you make
You're
your own.
yeah,
true.
you're
I make-
cloth punk, not
I
cyber.
make my own
Hot.
socks.
Yarn punk?
yarn punk.
Yo,
That's
I
a new
play that
genre. Yarn punk.
I play the hell out of yarn punk.
Okay, so what is yarn punk then? What do we? What are the-
Yoshi's Crafted World, that game for the Switch, like where everything's made out of yarn. That's yarn
Oh.
punk.
Okay, so punk is like anti-establishmentarianism for the most
Yoshi,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
in a nutshell.
And yarn is yarn.
anti-synthetics?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, that's like rebelling against fabric industries.
Slow production instead of
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know,
In a
factory stuff.
fast-paced world.
Custom made goods.
In a
for the
fast-paced
joy of it.
world, Emma took her time knitting.
Emma took her time to make
These
These
Shot at
socks took longer than other socks.
We should write that.
And like there's,
We
there's a
already
ton
have.
of there's a ton of other things that get mass produced where like making them by hand is part of it, like pottery,
Yeah.
basket weaving, things like that. Like yeah, you could mass produce it, but there's something to be said about just really enjoying your afternoon making something and then giving it away or selling it or trading it, things like that.
So it'd be like,
I understand where it's coming from.
so the game would be like Yarn Punk 2020, slow stories in a fast-paced world.
Ooh,
It
that's
could
really
cer-
good.
That could
really-
certainly be like an RPG, like about crafting, where you're like a merchant trying, and like your city or your town is home to all these like giant corporations trying to make the same things that you make, and you're making your yarn, sticking it to the man that runs
Yeah,
the
actually,
big yarn company
yeah,
down
to
the
be-
street.
A great
You go to
visual
the
novel.
you go to like the one of a kind show, and the one of a
But I
kind
guess-
show
I
is
think
like
it's-
instead of the street market, it's the one of a kind craft show
Mm.
or the artist alley at a con.
I've been to those before. when
Yeah.
I
lived
think it
in
would be
Vancouver.
great.
Yeah, I wonder. This actually sounds like it's very doable as just a solo RPG.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you could knit,
There
while
is a
doing it,
knitting. There is a knitting RPG. There's an RPG
Yeah, you
where
told me about it.
Oh,
where
yeah.
you knit and tell stories. I forget what it's called, but one exists. Okay, before we dive too deep
We've gotten distracted.
into yarn punk, the new breakout genre of 2020.
All I want to say is that cyberpunk for me is all I want to talk about when I think about cyberpunk is ableism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to talk about when it
Yep.
comes to cyberpunk, and if you want to join us in a conversation about cyberpunk, you can join us next Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern, twitch.tv/AZNSRep. Got to plug the channel, or watch on YouTube, youtube.com/AZNSRepresent. But yeah, today we're talking about food. We're talking about depictions of fantasy food. And last week, after the inaugural episode of the wrap up, we were on the Discord talking about Heroes Feast, the new cookbook, the new officially licensed D&D cookbook that came out, and we found the recipe for Karatur noodles. Now I think a whole bunch of us had previously talked about Karatur noodles on like Twitter, but we had never really we never really dove deep into, what actually constituted Karatur noodles. So I actually just pulled up the Karatur noodle recipe. I think we're going to talk about the recipe itself, the ingredients and what they call for in it. But we're also going to talk about the flavor text. And then I know, Steve, you highlighted a couple of other things in the book that we should also talk about within the greater context of crafting fantasy culinary traditions.
Yeah.
So I feel like we should start with the Karatur noodles first, and then we'll go into fantasy culinary traditions, and then we'll move from there.
Did we read the flavor text last week?
Did we? I feel like
I think so.
we did
I
that
think we
off stream.
did.
That was in the chat because we were in our Discord server.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
blending, Emma. The
Yeah, I
streams and
don't know
and the server are
anymore.
becoming one. So let me read the text for Karatur noodles. Or sorry, Steve, I saw your hand go and I was looking.
No,
down.
that's because my pecs are really, really sore, and I'm trying to like stretch
Oh,
out the
oh,
muscle, and I'm just really,
You're
really
like
tight.
Henry Cavill in Mission Impossible Fallout when he reloads his guns. I love
Okay, but
Yes.
but also if you're doing a photo shoot and you need to like get a pump on real quick before the camera starts getting on you, that is
Right.
a really good strategy to do it because it doesn't make your cheeks turn red because you're not really being aerobic about it. Just FYI.
Oh,
Interesting. I can do that.
Steve is-
I can do a peck dance. That's one of my little skills I can do.
Steve is our Henry Cavill, right? Like this
Steve is definitely our Henry Cavill.
Yeah,
I thought we
fair.
were the Avengers. I thought
Yeah,
Steve
I
was
thought-
Steve.
Yeah, I thought I was Steve Rogers.
Yeah. And I was obviously I was Black Widow.
No, Scarlett Johansson is Asian. That role is already filled.
Oh right, I was Scarlett Johansson.
You're
Right?
Scarlett Johansson.
And you were Scarlett Johansson. Yeah. Okay.
I'm Scarlett Johansson. You're Scarlett Johansson.
Everyone's
Agatha's
Scarlett Johansson.
Right.
Scarlett Johansson.
Now I remember. How could I forget?
We're all Scarlett Johansson. That's a shirt right there. We're all
In our
Scarlett
own
Johansson.
way, you two can be Scarlett Johansson.
That should be our T-shirt.
That should be our T-shirt.
Ooh.
Ooh.
That's some dangerous territory.
That's a
I like it, but it's
Yikes.
dangerous.
I feel like that's like a button we make. We're all ScarJo.
it's a limited run.
A
It's
very limited run.
or
Only
it could
available
just-
at cons when you meet us in person.
Or it can be like so like the same art, but except all of you, like the Asian reads, instead of you two, it'll just be two Scarlett Johansson.
You can only get it if you go to a church and you talk to these old Asian ladies. The only
Yeah,
way to
if
get the
you're
good
like-
ones.
If
If you're like, yo, hit me with that mapo
the mapo tofu comes with a ScarJo pin. and the Asian grandma hands it to you and is like, we're all Scarlett Johansson.
Oh my
God.
goodness.
That sounds like the start.
Pulls
to a
off the
really
face
weird
like in Mission
spy flick.
Impossible and is ScarJo. Oh,
Oh
That's actually terrifying.
that's
Oh,
terrifying.
I hate it. I hate it.
Ooh, this turned into a horror podcast.
I can't believe I say
And-
this, but I want to go to Karatur Noodles.
This is the first episode of Secret Asians. Oh, that worked out. But anyways, let's go to Karatur noodles. I love how we went. I will say this. I love how we went from Henry Cavill reloading his guns to ScarJo. So Karatur noodles. Few nations on the planet Toril are as powerful or influential as the human empire of Sholung, found in the vast region of Karatur. While this region boasts distinct religions and a proud culture, it also possesses an equally strong culinary tradition. Although there is sparse interaction or conflict between the city-states of the Sword Coast and Karatur, many of its tea leaves, such as Pale Jade, Fim, Dragon's Eye, and Longjing, are imported in significant quantities by Faerunian traders, and certain dishes, including various noodles, have made the long migration west as well. While you won't find this stir-fried entree on just any tavern menu, it has found its way into the more modern eateries of cultural epicenters such as Waterdeep. A heaping bowl of noodles, flash cooked in a deep oil-drizzled skillet, along with chunks of chicken, vegetables, and a salty soy sauce, or garum, a fish-based sauce, has become a popular change of pace from the traditional roasts and soups of the Sword Coast. Okay. So let's talk about that.
I had
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Jeremy.
I had this idea a couple years ago when I was coming up with plans for like a D&D campaign to run with my brother, I had an idea of creating like a Chinatown setting in Waterdeep, like creating a Waterdeep version of like Chinatown full of immigrants from Karator, and basically telling like a Chinese immigrant story with this fantasy veneer. I chose Karator because it was the official Asian setting. I came up with the idea because I think I was looking through Xanathar's Guide to Everything, and there's like a picture of a war wizard who looks Asian. And I was like, you could tell a cool immigrant story about people from this, official realm based on like China and Japan in the main D&D city, and really tell interesting, unique immigrant stories about food, about assimilation, about contact between different cultures. And something like this would be an interesting thing to inject into that world, but I don't really want to inject it into that idea because I don't think the description is written very well.
No. There are a couple things. I mean, like when you're talking about Chinatowns, one of the things you also have to talk about is segregation.
Yes, absolutely.
That's like a huge thing. Honestly, if I were to do anything, it would just be like what Steve did and just play Jiangxi and then just send it to Karator.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. I think the big thing here for me is like they are like, one, the concerns that Steve and I expressed very, very frequently on our Oriental adventures. Read through and what Emma, myself, Michelle, Mackenzie, Jackie all talk about on our Karator stream is that like the more you mention Karator, the more people want to turn to the original source and the only comprehensive source on Karator, which is the Karator Eastern Realms Volumes 1 and 2, AD&D campaign settings, which you can still buy, and Oriental Adventures. So rather than distancing themselves from these places, you now, create even more of a reason to go and look into them. For me, though, when you read this, it's like, yes, this region boasts distinct religions and a proud culture. What culture is
they have cuisine.
And of course, they have a strong culinary tradition. What? So they're basically saying, yes, they have a different religion. No shit. They have culture that they are proud of. No shit. And they have a unique way of cooking. No shit. This is that page in Oriental Adventures again where they're like, things happen. People are born.
Yeah.
The weather changes. The seasons change. Except this time it's like, oh yeah, they have religion. They have faith. They have culture. And they eat
have
stuff.
food.
And they have food.
Yeah.
It's just like the language that they constantly use, whether or not this is this is not the D&T team writing this, right? But the language that's always associated with any mention of Karator is always a language that works to create difference between Karator and elsewhere. Especially in like, it makes little sense in a D&D world where everything is so fantastical and different and unique. But they work very, very hard to make Karator exotic. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts that you want to share, because I could just keep going. I want to create space for everyone else.
Yeah. I want to talk about how including Karator noodles is interesting, and you could have it be very like westernized, but you need to talk about kind of what factors lead up to that. And this doesn't. It is actually painted as like everyone in Karator loves these bland ass noodles, and that fiction is not something I want to fuck around with. But if the book had talked about how, it's very common for people to really not enjoy some of these other flavors that are coming from here. And so a lot of creators have tried their best to make it more attuned to Waterdeep palettes or things like that. And that's why we're using white chicken breast and we're not using things like tofu or like...
Steve, spoilers. We haven't gotten to the ingredients yet.
Oh, come on. Spoilers, it has chicken in it. Like, I don't feel bad about that.
No, it's fine.
Chicken breast.
It has
no
chicken
breast.
Thighs. Yeah, no dark meat, just the white meat.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
Do you think, though, that, I mean, if we're talking about Karator bringing noodles and dishes over to the West, do you think that we would have seen soup noodles be more of a tradition in places like Waterdeep because that is closer to what they're already eating than fried noodles? Do you think it
wouldn't be different enough?
Oh, it's true. It wouldn't be different enough. You're right.
I mean, like if we play within like the fiction here, the noodles have come from far away. The noodles are dried so they can make the trip.
Yeah.
Right. So you bring them over. You've spent all this energy and time and money bringing over these noodles. So you want to sell it at a really high price, and you want to be different. So if they're only eating soup and Waterdeep, you're not going to sell soup. You're going to sell, and you're going to like play into your exoticness. You're going to take advantage of the masses. You're going to be like, I have fried noodles, something you've never had before. You'll never get it anywhere else.
I find it hard to believe that noodles would come over from Karatur and not be magically preserved like instant noodles. That technology that made,
The food arrived
methodology
by
that-
then.
Oh, okay. Jeremy finally gets to eat.
Yay!
Here are your Karatur noodles now.
Karatur noodles.
One thing I do want to point out, which is a good thing, one good thing, I got one tiny good thing about Karatur noodles, that there are 5 chapters to this cookbook. There's human cuisine, elven cuisine, and it goes on like that. And the 5th one is uncommon cuisine, and Karatur is listed under human.
Yes,
So that's nice.
that's nice.
That's it.
It's nice. They did a
That's it, that's all I
decent.
got.
They did a decent.
Me being positive ends very quickly. when it comes to
Andreas
rice, so
actually in the chat said, "What if Waterdeep had like a hardcore pho subculture, like a pho? Pho was really popular, or like a similar dish. I feel like that would be cool. I mean, like
we're getting hungry again.
I think we're going to talk about like introducing our own cuisines and everything else, but
Yeah.
I think they could have done more. One of the things I've also noticed is that like they clearly indicate that it's trying to be adapted to the local culture, because they talk about salty soy sauce or garum, which is like a Roman, Greek, Phoenician sauce. So they're taking that sort of Western Mediterranean and European sort of influence and putting into this. I also love how they're like, the Sword Coast, they just eat roasts and soups. It's just like, what? That's all they eat? There's nothing else? Because I know that in this book that there are like way more recipes that are far more interesting than that. But while Jeremy kind of gets his food and gets some sustenance, I think it's important that we also read the ingredients. Steve, do you want to read the ingredients?
I'll read the ingredients. All right, we're enlightening faster this.
Yep.
3 tablespoons of soy sauce. Doesn't specify what kind. 2.5 tablespoons Shaoxing rice wine or dry sherry, such as Amontillado. 1 tablespoon Asian sesame oil. 1 pound skinless, boneless chicken breasts cut into 1/2-inch strips. 6 ounces dried rice stick noodles, 1/4 inch wide. 1/4 cup plus 2 teaspoons of peanut oil or vegetable canola, safflower, or grapeseed oil. 1/2 cup low sodium chicken broth. 1 teaspoon light brown sugar. 1/2 teaspoon cornstarch. Yeah, that's important. 2-inch fresh ginger, peeled, finely chopped and grated. 5 garlic, only 5 garlic cloves, finely chopped. 1/4 teaspoon red pepper flakes, or to taste. Salt, pepper, large onion, bell pepper, celery stalks, and 6 scallions. So it has some elements here where I'm like, yeah, those belong in this kind of like stir fry type dish.
Asian
nothing
sesame
weird here.
oil.
There's no like marmalade or something strange.
No like chili jam.
Oh God.
But yeah, the Asian sesame oil, I guess it's an odd thing for me to. I've never seen a recipe call for Asian sesame oil.
Is there sesame oil? Is sesame oil unique to Asia?
I don't know.
I don't actually know.
No, I'm gonna.
I feel
say
like
is
sesame
it
oil is always
not-
sesame oil.
And is it like so broadly used in other cuisines that you have to specify an Asian sesame oil?
Also, is it remarkably different if you get a slightly different sesame oil? It's an oil.
The only difference is I know there's toasted sesame oil and there's sesame oil, so that's going to taste different. But
So,
yeah.
No.
My
like,
food, in case you wanted to.
Oh, damn.
Give us a
Yay.
quick description here.
So this is Korean food from a new place. It's just japchae, which is like the kind of the silky noodles. There's tteokbokki, which is like the rice, like kind of like the thick rice noodle things that in a spicy sauce. Then there's finally like a seafood pancake.
Yeah.
side.
Aw.
So
Oh,
hopefully,
sounds so good.
hopefully it's good, seeing as how we had to order it twice.
Yeah.
Sounds better than Karatur noodles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My beef with this is that they made like the blandest noodles.
it's missing a lot of the sauces that are very easy to get. And I don't know if it's because they didn't want to like make it like weirdly anachronistic and like they wanted to like stay within the fantasy. Like
I can confirm that this is better than Carator noodles.
oh, thank God. That was
Thanks,
eating
Mike.
away at me.
The greatest mystery of this stream.
So like I think like some stuff like they didn't include like a hoisin sauce or like an oyster sauce or like any of the like more traditional Chinese sauces. And I don't know if that was done on purpose because they feel like the audience wouldn't have access to an Asian market where those are really accessible, or they didn't want it to like break the fantasy.
Well, the fantasy is already like a bad fantasized version of China already.
I do want to point out that they called for garum, like a fish sauce, and they didn't list a single fish sauce in the recipe.
I think
that one kind of upsets me.
Yeah, I think one thing to also mention is that they called this Caratur noodles, even though Caratur is supposed to represent Asia. So this recipe is just Asian noodles, not like the noodles of Shoulong, which is supposed to be China, right? They said Caratur noodles.
Asian
And even
noodles.
then, it's just like Carator inspired noodles, because if this is a Waterdeep recipe, it's not even something like straight from there.
Yeah, because they don't have all the ingredients that they might have in Caratur, and that's understandable because the geography is different. There's a lot of beige. There's sorry, the geography of Caratur is different. The crops that they would cultivate are different. The local taste would be different. So it makes total sense that the recipe would not quite be the same. But it would still be interesting if they made a more interesting recipe here.
So on one hand, yeah, absolutely. On another hand, I get the story behind it. I think the story is somewhat interesting if they hadn't called the dish Carator noodles, because you're referring to Asia noodles, which makes no sense. Think about it, like this is how to explain it to a white audience. I know a lot of people are not white, but let me speak to the white people for a second. Think about, for instance, you going to a fast casual restaurant or fast food restaurant and getting like, lo mein or chow mein.
Yeah.
They have names. No one calls, even in these places that are catered towards an American market or a North American market, no one calls them Asia noodles or Asian noodles, because that's a weird like generalization to make. It's also just not that appetizing sounding.
Caratur noodles. I mean, if the previous recipe is yawning portal buttermilk biscuits.
Why would I want? Like, yeah, it sounds well. It's a more specific place, right?
And there's a
Carator.
picture. So I think there's a lot that could have been done with this. I also want to talk about just like what to do when you're trying to make. Do we want to go into how to do your own fantasy foods, or do we want to go into the other things you pointed out in this book, Steve?
I have a couple of things that are actually also very good about the recipe, but I still think you can improve it. So one, you're basically frying it all in a deep, wide skillet. And it's very clear what they're trying to describe, but they're like, we shouldn't say that word.
Don't say
that
wok.
word is like, we shouldn't say that word. And if you look at the chef's note, so the chef who drove a lot of this was Adam Reed, who I did a research in, and he seems like a very stand-up guy, and I'm actually very excited to see more of his work. But he actually goes in the italics of the sidebar and says a large skillet is really, really important. And the reason why you want that surface area are these reasons. And I'm like, that's really, really good advice. That's actually super valuable piece of information nugget. He also goes to talk about, if you don't want chicken, you can use shrimp, but you need to prepare the shrimp differently. And here's how I would do it. Mm-hmm. These are all like quality professional pieces of advice. So good on them. That's dope.
Why couldn't they list like some, like, if you can find it, ingredients, this can help, or this will change, like, I don't know.
And I think the sidebar is kind of missing that too, because the idea of kind of whatever's kind of around kind of goes into this. So you'll often see like broccoli, like Western broccoli, thrown into a lot of these stir fries because that's like widely available. Throw that in there. Green peas are like a super like ubiquitous English ingredient you added. If you have those laying around, those go in there and like they can be fine.
Vegetables.
Yeah.
Vegetables. Even just put some cabbage in there.
Cabbage.
Cabbage in everything.
I feel like there are a lot of modern cookbooks that kind of have this problem, even one written by like, major chefs. Like, I don't know, like I feel like there's Gordon Ramsay's like Chinese noodles or something like that, or Gordon Ramsay's like Asian recipe, like one recipe in the book. And I feel like that's like, this is the D&D version of that.
Yeah, this is
And that's why it's so
Asian
surface level.
And the last thing that I thought would really elevate this thing is that a lot of these ingredients, they don't do this anywhere in the book, but especially here, I would love to see reasoning behind using certain ingredients. So, for example, that wine that you're using, it's to remove kind of that like chickeny odor. It is for flavor, yeah, but it's really more of like an odor thing, and that's really, really important in Chinese cuisine because you want to like balance things out. Sesame oil, you should use that as your base oil for frying. It's a finishing oil, right? And like I think it's important to talk about these things because ingredients have meaning and they all have a function, and together it makes this like really interesting thing to consume.
But I think this book has a different function from what you want it to be, right? Most cookbooks are a great way to learn about a culture, right? But this cookbook isn't a way to teach people about how Asian ingredients are used. It's a way to portray these fictional cultures, right? While like yawning portal biscuits aren't like a cultural thing, I guess they're a cultural thing within, the yawning portal that the inn. Karatur noodles are here to basically show the relationship between the land masses of Karatur and the West, right? It's not here to tell you about their culture. It's just to show you that, like, hey, they have this exotic thing. It's noodles, and they bring it over here, and some people try to make it, and here's what they tried to make, right? I think what would have been interesting if it was like, oh, yes, Elminster himself, literally, the Karatur campaign setting was written for Elminster. That's the narrative, and is telling him about the world of Karatur. What if this was a recipe from the writings that were delivered to Elminster about Karatur, and it was a legit Karatur recipe? But instead, what we got was, as many people have said on Twitter, we got the Panda Express.
Yep.
Of
Which is ironic because, like, Elminster's Ed Greenwood's character, and he was against putting Karatur in his Forgotten Realms because he said it's just too similar to the real world.
Yeah.
Just Asia. Like,
it's just Asia.
It's just Asia.
Okay.
Nice.
This is just, it's not, Karatur noodles aren't necessarily offensive. It's just a huge missed opportunity to actually do something good and cool.
You mentioned one other thing earlier on in that it's trying to show identities of various cultures within the D&D scope. So by having this food here, you know more about the people and whatnot. But then it also doesn't want to tell you too much about their identity.
Of course.
So it kind of wants it both ways, where it's like you can have Karatur noodles and you can feel like you understand their identity, but they don't want to put too much identity in there because then it might be too inaccessible. And it's kind of like, let things just be.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting if they were like, let's just make a General So's chicken, but we'll make it a fictional Sholung commander. And you could craft a story about that because there's Odix skillet fried sliced potatoes, and it's derived from the personal recipe of Odix Sandath, proprietor and chef of the Inn of the Last Home, located on the remote Kryn city called Solus. They have all of this, and they said Odix's personal blend of garlic, paprika, pepper, cayenne, and a sizable scoop of local salted butter is often emulated but tough to beat. That sounds so interesting compared to what we got with Karatur noodles. Like they could have attributed it to a person in Karatur, or honestly, they could have. What if they just included if they wanted to kind of allude to Karatur but not make it Karatur, they could have put an Asian name and said, this is this character's dish.
Especially if it's in Waterdeep, I think it would need a person, like someone moved from Karatur to Waterdeep and started a restaurant, realized that the local people couldn't do spice and this is what they made. Sorry, Jeremy.
No, I was just saying there aren't that many like major lore figures just in the modern edition of D&D with any connection to Karator.
So you make one, and it would be awesome.
Yeah, they would have to make one, and I feel like they probably just wanted to pick from what was already there to avoid stepping on toes. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing.
There's a couple things that stand out about one. Like there's an actual, for me, there's an interesting story about someone from Karator probably coming over and saying, "I'm going to make money off of these people," and I kind of want to know who the fuck that is.
The merchant who's like, "I'm gonna be rich."
Yeah, who is that person? I want to meet them. And this is like the chance to mention a character that honestly no one's gonna ever care about again.
It's the character Steve and I played on Does It Roll?
Yeah.
And speaking about Icewind Dale, I kind of want to mention the Karator noodles is the only recipe that's not from Faerun, which is a reason why it stands out.
Is there something from Chult in the book?
There's one thing from Chult, and it is a drink, and it is called the Chultan Zombie. Yes, but
there's also a
That's
couple of
also
Greyhawk.
bad.
There's also some like Greyhawk recipes and whatnot. So
it's like relatively, especially from the continent Karator, there's one thing,
yes.
and there's nothing from other like Zahara. There's nothing from there, which I don't know if I'd want that, but. So there's a lot of lost opportunities here, and I think part of it makes sense to me because part of it's like, what are you imagining in a typical fantasy setting? And D&D approaches a lot of typical fantasy settings from a very Western perspective. So a lot of the recipes here are designed to fit into that, or designed to be centered ethnically in different ways, so you can apply them to a race instead of a country.
You want to know the name of a halfling dish? It's called hogs and bedrolls instead of pigs in a blanket.
I think that's cute.
That's
It's cute.
Right? It's just like they've got these. Yeah, it's like, oh, there's like halflings. They're fun. And then you go to where was it? Underdark Lotus with fire lichen spread,
which is like also
Those are
called
mushrooms,
fungus
right?
2 ways.
Those
there's
the mushrooms?
Lotus.
No,
No,
that
no.
recipe.
No, there is the mushroom one, but that's
Okay.
drow mushroom steaks.
Right.
No, but this is literally, this is the fungus 2 ways, and it's a zesty Durger essential. But they say Underdark Lotus, but there is no lotus included in the ingredients.
because it's made from the roots of the Underdark Lotus, which is a blue cap fungus.
No, because
Oh, they say it here. Made from the bright white roots of
Where
the
is it?
Underdark Lotus or blue cap fungus.
oh, right there. I was hoping that it would be something like you could arrange the romaine lettuce leaves in the shape of a lotus.
I think that'd be cool too.
But that's a very like East Asian thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah. But then, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think that's what stands out.
But
to me.
there was another sort of heavier topic that we were going to talk about. And
Yep.
Steve, you pointed this up because you read through more of the book than the rest of us did.
Yeah.
Did you want to kind of introduce those things?
Yeah, I'd love to. So
We can go
there's
recipe
one,
by recipe if you want.
There's one recipe in particular that I want to kind of narrow in on that actually really surprised me when I first saw it. It's mentioned in some preamble and whatnot, and I thought it was kind of like a throwaway joke. But on page 289, we see the first recipe for the uncommon people recipe, Archon the Cruel's flame roasted halfling chili. And when I first saw this, I thought like, oh, they had a halfling chapter, but now we're going to see more chili made by halflings. But very specifically in the flavor text here. So content warning for like consumption of flesh. This recipe here calls for freshly ground halfling to be the protein of the dish, which to me, like even speaking those words kind of gives me like a disgust reaction that it's very hard for me to kind of work through. But this recipe here specifically talks about how one particular NPC really, really enjoys eating halflings. And this recipe is inspired by that idea. And the recipe itself calls for lean ground turkey. So now we kind of have to live in this world where we know that the best substitute for halfling carcass is turkey.
They also say that consumption of halfling is like a big part of dragonborn cuisine in I think the first sentence, which comes out of nowhere. Like there's been no mention of that in any of the established lore about dragonborn since fourth edition. And as someone who's actually playing a dragonborn in one of the few D&D games I get to actually play in, that just blows my mind. They made a core race eat another core race.
Meat
Like,
for the meat god. Understandably, the preparation of halfling is frowned upon in many realms, but their consumption is an important part of dragonborn cuisine.
I mean, it like even compared to like the recipe directly underneath that is orc bacon, and it starts off with the sentence, "No, it isn't made from orcs." Why would it be? Even though we just suggested that's a thing that people can do, but for orcs, like that's a weird. Overall, this is just unnecessary. Like I get that it's a joke, but it's unnecessary. It's one of those things that I would X card immediately. And it's a kind of othering that I do not appreciate, because this this is already under uncommon races. So these are already the strange folk, right? And now you're attributing them to eating not just a core race, but one of the races that got a whole section of a cookbook.
Yeah.
Like
they're not just like the funny small people. We gave them an entire chapter of identity.
Mm-hmm. And you could put this halfling on top of noodles, too.
Oh, for fuck's sake!
But they're buttered noodles. It says.
Also, this is a side note, and again, trigger warning for consumption of human flesh. But we're mammals. Halflings are mammals, so the proper substitute would probably be something akin to veal, not turkey. That makes no sense.
I just find it to be unnecessary and not even like it doesn't even make sense within the established lore of D&D. You know, maybe they're attributing this recipe to an evil character. That is the case here. But to include a line saying that this is emblematic of Dragonborn cuisine just seems very off-putting, particularly when everything in the lore suggests that, oh, Dragonborn are these proud warriors from, you know, who basically, you know, value family and friendship and camaraderie with various other races of the world. And it just seems off to say that they, one of the big kind of reptilian-looking species in the game, are willing to go and eat halflings, one of the commonly depicted as short, round, plump races of the game. There's a lot going on there.
It's like they also say this recipe is rumored to be the personal one of Arkan the Cruel.
Then don't call it. Don't call it like a major Dragonborn thing.
Yeah, then. But it's like also how did this become a rumor? It's like, did you hear that Arkan the Cruel likes to eat halfling chili? Why?
And because of the way the book is written, you could absolutely just say in the text. In reality, it's not made of halfling. It's a rumor that this person spreads.
You could have, for
various reasons.
Yeah,
and that actually is way more like emblematic of who that character is, and kind of like overall like morality and identity within the realm as a whole, because it also shows that in your D&D games you probably shouldn't be like focusing on these kind of themes. Maybe it's like a rumor and whatnot, and it causes disgust, and that's like easier for your players to tell stories about, because it's really, really hard to connect with a story about someone who's eating other people who have like dreams and hopes, and they have families and they have friends, and they, you know, grow old and happy and then die.
I think that's such an easy fix, and it's so apparent that the folks who wrote this book are not the same people who, you know, work on the core D&D content, right? If you said, oh, this is what is rumored that Arkan the Cruel eats halfling, and not that this is a recipe of Arkan the Cruel's, would have made so much more sense, because I think most D&D fans know that Arkan the Cruel is an objectively evil character.
Yeah.
Literally wields the hand of Vecna. So, like, yeah, if there was a rumor, like you said, that it was made with halfling, then totally. But if it was like Dragonborn's like, look, turkey, I think I would get that.
We should mention that this is not the only recipe. So another recipe in the uncommon section is fried fingers. People can probably already see where this is going, but I'm going to read out the flavor text if folks don't mind. A dish popularized by the lizard folk of Saltmarsh, Where it was commonly prepared with humanoid parts instead of poultry, these succulent breaded strips give a new meaning to the term finger food. Today, this recipe is served throughout all civilized parts of the multiverse, featuring pulled strips of locally sourced fowl, rolled in an unconventional seasoned breading, baked crisp, and served with dwarven mustard, tiefling tomato molasses, or a warm plum dipping sauce. If you do have the occasion to try the original fatty halfling fingers work best.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm struggling not to say what the fuck every single time I read something like that.
So it's so weird because I'm running Ghosts of Saltmarsh for my girlfriend, and one of the main adapted adventures in there is befriending a local contingent of lizard folk and realizing that they're not just one-dimensional carnivores or evil creatures. They're usually depicted as neutral in almost all editions of D&D and Pathfinder. And I think like there is some stuff talking about how they're carnivorous and might have eaten flesh at some point, but to say that they popularized this recipe, I feel like it's just another example of this cookbook kind of contradicting the internal consistency of the game.
Well,
What bothers me most is they're trying to be, I think, funny, that it's just supposed to be a joke, but it's like, I think when we were talking about this in our chat, I'm like, it's hard to like not be influenced by that information, to see like some of these races now as halfling eaters. It's like that changes things.
Yeah, if you go to Volo's, there's actually the flavor text for lizard folk says, if you're considering taking a scaled one along on an adventure, remember this important fact. The strange inhuman glint in its eyes as it looks you over is the same look you might give a freshly grilled steak. So it's like that's that sort of information is already kind of coded into the game. And you know, like I get they're going for like, oh, these like carnivorous reptilian races. But it's interesting that you kind of you pair that with the literal text that says, despite their alien outlook, some lizard folk make an effort to understand and in their own manner befriend people of other races.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, oh, you know what I really miss? Fried fingers.
There's a lot to dislike about this. One, it means the original included bones, and like I get that, but that's a very weird thing to go from we used to fry whole fingers to now we fry. Also, there's no pulled strips of locally sourced fowl; it's sliced strips. But overall, it's just the cannibalism that really gets me. And this is not to say that cannibalism isn't a thing that happens. It's happened a lot, and more than people probably realize. It was quite common, for example, to eat mummies, as in, you know, dead carcasses of humans in large parts of Europe, especially Britain, to cure, well, quite a lot of ailments, honestly. So, like, cannibalism is a thing, but there's not been really a time in history in the vast majority of nations that we can find where it's been okay. And I get this is different because technically they're different species. This is again where we run into a problem where races and species are trying to, and cultures are all trying to be the same thing. But
I do want to interject though. When you say when it's not okay, I think you say that from your cultural perspective. You know, cannibalism and other forms of consumption of a human were practiced in other cultures. Yeah, but they have deeply rooted and nuanced cultural meaning.
Yeah, right? I was gonna.
And that's kind of missing from this. And I think that's the point you're trying to say. It's like we were all talking about when Steve shared that academic paper. Like cannibalism is used in, you know, D&D and fantasy. I won't say, you know, this book is the only thing guilty of this, because we see this in fantasy novels and fantasy movies all over the place, right? But cannibalism is used here as a tool for expressing stark cultural differences between two groups. But we're expressing differences along this good and bad dichotomy. And I think that's what we should be talking about, right? Yes, cannibalism can occur, and things do eat other things. That is the nature of this fantastical world of monsters. And this is what happens when you take a monstrous entity that you've included in the game and have coded them as sort of antagonistic towards the protagonists of your story and make them a playable race, like the lizard folk. Or you take something that's supposed to be scary, like the Dragonborn, and try to give them more human personalities, but then also say that, like, yeah, they also eat halflings, ground halfling. They like that in their chili. There's not a lot of thought put into this. Like, in fact, none at all. It's just like, let's do it for flavor. And I don't really say that as like a cooking pun. But yeah.
I do like, and I feel like it's worthwhile to point out then that would this, like a cookbook, ever be the place to talk about that kind of, the culinary dichotomy of good versus evil? And it's not.
Well,
the
there
place
shouldn't
for
be
it.
a dichotomy of good versus evil, because that's the same. That's the same dichotomy that you kind of create when you tell, like, your kids or something that, like, oh, that food's gross, or Chinese people eat worms. Like, that's the same sort of thing. Good, evil, acceptable, gross. Right?
I mean more like this is the. I guess what I'm saying is, and I should like not try and phrase this as a question.
That's fine.
I don't think a cookbook is the place to try and unpack this dichotomy we've made between good food and evil food. I don't think that a cookbook is the kind of place where we can make jokes about monstrous races and not have that just reflect upon the race as a whole and expect it to go off without a hitch. Like there was no way this was going to work unless this is the kind of joke that you find deeply inoffensive, which is not, I would imagine, a lot of people.
Yeah.
I want to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no. Did you have a thought that followed this? Because I actually have something that is going off of what Emma said before.
Go for it, Agatha.
Okay. And I've been thinking a lot about also like what I mean, aside from my own visceral reaction, which is it is pretty socially ingrained in me that I am not comfortable with cannibalism. But also I think, the whole thing about it played off as a joke. The one thing that also is really uncomfortable for me, not being aware of any of this lore prior, is this feeling of like this power dynamic between like because no one else really is getting eaten except for halflings.
They're always the butt of the joke.
Yeah. And there's just something about like, oh, it's because they're smaller and physically weaker that they are the prey.
Well, also they're often depicted as fat. Like they're often depicted as round.
Yeah.
And that says a lot, actually. There's a lot ingrained in there.
And there's that whole thing in
because of that.
Like the Hobbit with the trolls trying to eat the dwarves and Bilbo.
Yeah. I mean, halflings is inspired by hobbits. So I kind of that's another whole thing to like unpack there. But it's so uncomfortable to me that they're like all of these humanoid races that are supposed to be all like you can choose any of them, right, as a playable race. And that's so supposedly they have like advantages and disadvantages in different ways, but they're all supposed to start on an equal footing. Like if I'm playing a level 1 halfling, that is supposed to be the same as if I'm playing a level 1 elf, or a level 1 dragonborn. I mean, obviously there's like racial traits and stuff, but in this context, it's like, okay, but no, like if I'm playing a halfling, I'm not. It suddenly means that I'm flipping through this book, coming as someone who is not as familiar with D&D, right? I'm like,
I gotta worry about the Dragonborn player in the group now.
Yeah.
Also, a
that's-
halfling is not like a humanoid kind of like we're all equal here. I just happen to have these traits while you have those. I'm like I'm like a chicken or something. Like I'm
Yeah.
not. When you see me, you don't see me as like oh, so like that is terrifying. That is a joke.
That's a really good point.
And like,
like
that, it also makes it the option for like someone leading a game to take one of their halfling players and have them die by being eaten.
That's a
Yeah.
game you
Yeah.
should not participate in.
yeah,
Yeah,
like,
you shouldn't
or-
be playing that game.
That
Or
is,
even
Yeah.
just be dehumanized, which that kind
thank
of
you.
oppression
That's the word.
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a line often for a lot of my players and usually for myself in a lot of games, because usually we're not in a space where we can deconstruct and engage with that theme in a constructive or even joyful or pleasurable way. So Agatha, yeah, I definitely agree that the discomfort comes at like a very deep, visceral, emotional level because of the way it is framed and how it then dehumanizes these people.
Yes. And I know that this is definitely not intentional in terms of like,
Yes.
oh, because they are physically weaker. So of course they would be the ones like they would be the ones that are the prey, but also it implies that, right? Like
Yeah.
it implies this kind of like this like Darwinistic take that I am not comfortable with.
Yeah, I think they could have done so many. They could have done so many other things to make Dragonborn cuisine seem different. Like it didn't have to be they eat halflings. It didn't have to be that. That wasn't like the line that they had to cross.
They even have direct text that if you just remove the eating halflings part is already super like interesting.
It's interesting.
It says Dragonborn love proteins that are seared, charred on the outside, but basically raw on the inside.
It's more interesting than Karatur noodles already without the halflings bit.
Yeah.
And
Like-
yeah.
The idea that they just have this like very specific palate for high protein, like that kind of like rare taste of meat. Great. That's like powerful. People can engage with that, and no one is harmed by that. And you definitely don't dehumanize any of your fantasy races with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's an example that I think is really interesting. So it's a halfling dish called everything soup. And
Yeah.
here's why I like it. So the description is, this hearty soup was named for the halfling tradition of frantically raiding their pantries and gardens in nervous anticipation of hosting guests. Sometimes referred to as welcome soup, this stew is a meal in itself, bringing with a colorful medley of vegetables, including up to 4 different colors of carrots, green beans, peas, sweet flint corn, red bell peppers, and pulled poultry in a flavorful broth. It should be noted that some adventuresome halflings boldly mix chicken and turkey stock for extra oomph. This substantial soup will warm you to the core, and it cures curses, or so it's been rumored. Like, I love that text because it's like, oh, we meet a family of halflings, and they make us, they're like, oh, we weren't expecting you, but they make the party this welcome soup. And you have this really interesting discussion, and they're like, oh, like it reminds me of my mom's D&D character. And my mom's D&D character just makes kanji for everyone and always has goji berries because that's what my mom does. And she's like a cleric, and I've talked about this on stream before. She like never used healing spells, and she would just like, I make them kanji. That's my mom. She's like, oh, you're sick? I make you kanji. And as the GM, I'm like, that works, right? But like, I like this because it's like, what if you meet a halfling family and one of your party members are like really ill or something like that, and the halfling family's like, yo, we got this soup, the welcome soup. This will help. And that's such an interesting story to tell. And
I feel like the reason they were able to write that one better, though, is because the imagery of like a halfling frantically preparing food for a whole bunch of visitors is directly from The Hobbit.
Yeah,
That's like a
it is.
fantasy trope that they were able to pull from. And the reason that they weren't able to write something like Karator noodles very well is because they had no Asian people to rely on writing this thing. No tropes.
No,
all they could rely on was the trope of like, here are Asian noodles. Perhaps you can fry them in a large skillet.
you literally couldn't go and just find an Asian chef, or you couldn't go to
Or hit up an Asian,
one of the
TTRPG player on
one of the
Twitter.
church grandmas and get like a mapo tofu recipe like Agatha was talking about. Like you couldn't go and do that. Like
So,
I don't see why they couldn't.
again, the creative writer for the recipes was Adam Reed. So like a professional, legit chef. I'm sure if they had consulted with him, he would have an Asian inspired dish that he truly loves and would not be terribly difficult to make.
Yep.
Sounds like this was someone was involved either with his recipe, trying to like pull it towards a more like white generic palate, or this was not made by Adam Reed at all.
Yeah, this is where you get that clash between this being a D&D product and being recognizable for fans of the world of D&D, it also being a functional cookbook, right? And where these two kind of overlap. And I think in the last bit for this stream, I kind of want to kind of drive the conversation, if that's okay with the rest of you folks, into a direction of how we can do better, how you can introduce different cuisines into your game. Tools you could use to do that, whether they be game-based tools or real-world tools. Don't go to Asian music festivals, like they said in L5R. Actually, you would experience foods
Cultural
and stuff.
festivals.
Cultural festivals. Yeah. But I think like one of the things that I think we should talk about more is not only how, works like Heroes Feast kind of don't get you to think about privilege and don't get you to think about, specific tropes and how they evoke negative emotions and negative characterizations of certain kinds of characters. But I think we also need to talk about, how we can do better. So the question that I kind of want to pose to the group, and we can kind of free-form chat about this, is what would we do better? Would we lean towards a tool, or what would you want at your table? For me, I don't need a cookbook like this, because I can go to any cookbook or go on the internet and find a cool cookbook. What I personally want is a tool for creating maybe names of fantastical dishes or random tables that will let you, roll different recipes. Or I would honestly love a short zine of fantasy celebrity chefs. Their personalities, their restaurants, all of their entire kitchen, and descriptions of their staff. I would love to see a fantastical Gordon Ramsay. And he's just a really mean dude.
I mean, what I would love for locations to have lists of commonly used edible ingredients, because their relative comparison to Earth terms, because that would mean like I can look up these ingredients online and find a recipe that involves all of them, and I can say, hey, here's a recipe they have because the ingredients are right there, and like, because that's how a lot of these dishes are made. They're not, they're about what's local. That's how these regional cuisines start, and then they're adapted to palates. So play around with that, like we talked about before. If you go to a Dragonborn festival, their meat's going to be a little bit rarer than you probably expect. There's nothing wrong with having fantastical food. What's wrong is trying to generalize by using real life nations as a substitute for fantastical foods and fantastical races, in my opinion.
Yeah, it almost seems like there needs to be a very general guide for writing food into fantasy. And I think there are some people who have done that online a little. And part of that starts with looking at trends in how food is used within fantasy settings. I read an interesting one that was about how food is used in fantasy versus science fiction and the role that plays within a narrative. So for fantasy, it's often to imbue certain peoples and moments with magic, or to give your readers and participants a chance to relax, because food is comforting. It's a moment of getting to know people or experiencing something comforting. So usually it's a breather. So you see a lot of fantasy foods that are actually just based on well-known dishes. Whereas in sci-fi and then some fantasy settings, food is used to create an other and a sense of difference or disgust, such as like sci-fi, often it's like, oh, you're in a different planet, you're given a bowl of weird looking bugs. It's like, just think about what food is doing within your story and see if you're following into some of those tropes. And yeah, like
You know what could
Adam
have
Ali
been?
was saying, like, look at real life, how cuisines develop, how it differs between not just different nations, but also people, groups of people within those places, like social standing or generation, or even your occupation can influence what you eat all the time and what you like, you know?
So here's a great idea that they could have done. And if I had any sort of power at Wizards of the Coast, what I would have done is I would have made a micro setting within Waterdeep. What I would have done was I would have made a food alley.
Oh yeah.
I would have made a food alley, and I would have gotten every designer on my design team. I would have gotten some freelancers as well, and I would have said, I need you to write a food stall. I need you to write an NPC who is the owner, chef. I need you to write that. And then what I want you to do is I want you to go to a member of your family, be it like your mother, your father, your grandparents, and I want you to get your favorite recipe from your childhood, and I want you to include that in this book. So not only do you get a fantasy restaurant, and all of them are put within a beautifully laid out Wizard's book that becomes canon, so you get to immortalize your family in D&D. But you also get to include like an NPC. So like my grandpa owned some of the first Chinese restaurants in Toronto. I would have put him right in there, right? And his name was Danny Moon. Right?
Waterdeep Night Market. It's such a good
Don't
idea.
don't even give him a new name.
No, don't even give
No,
him a new
100%
name.
no.
Don't even give him a new name. Put him right in there. And one of the first restaurants he owned, the last restaurant that he owned was called Autumn Moon. Boom, right there.
Oh, so
Throw that in right there,
good.
and then you say, okay, this is what it looks like. This is the chef. This is the sous chef. This is the entire family behind the restaurant, because I would have made it a family restaurant, right? And these are the fantastical things that they serve. And then here's one real world recipe that you could try, and you include that in every little restaurant, every little food stall, right? And you tap into the fan base of D&D, and you make a truly international cookbook and introduce all of this cool, fantastical, and real-world diversity into your campaign setting. Wizards, hit me up. Let's go. But yeah.
I already have
that actually leans into kind of like my idea for like a toolkit or advice or like how to do this better. And I feel that Heroes Feast has a scope problem. And what I mean by that is that the scope of the book is too large and there's not enough space to explore each idea with enough credence. If we narrow the scope to a location, to a goal, to an identity, if you narrow it down, it actually becomes a lot easier to make sure that everything you put in there, meets that goal or approaches it. And it actually reduces the risk that you come up with a recipe where it has weird, uncomfortable implications. And then, everyone wins in that case. It's also a lot safer because you can really make the book a lot smaller. From a business point of view, you can test the waters and actually see if this experiment is worth investing more in. And hey, if it does work and people were really interested in it and they love this narrowed scope, great. Now you can expand the scope with more funding and a higher budget and more writers, a more diverse team. So I think from a business sense, even that makes more sense to reduce the scope.
Yeah. Right?
So that's no scope creep. That's Steve's tool. No scope creep.
Honestly, I feel like I really just want to make this concept now of like a fantasy food alley and just
That sounds amazing.
Yo, we should
now
you know what we
I'm
should
already
do?
thinking about like, what did my grandma
You know what
make
we're gonna
that
do?
I loved?
I actually want to do this. Let's do this for Asians Represent. And what we'll do is everyone involved in Asians Represent, if they want to, can write an NPC, a food stand, or a food stall, or whatever. We'll put it together into a zine, and we'll make it a charity zine.
Like
I
that.
think that
Sounds
sounds amazing.
great.
And we should do that. And then like, yeah, and then we can get an artist to draw like a map of this literal food alley that you could stick into any campaign setting.
Food alley.
Food alley.
Okay.
Make it happen.
I like the food alley idea, but what if it was a traveling food festival?
Food truck.
It's
truck.
well, here's why I think this would work as a food alley, because it works as, so I'm thinking of this as like an OSR tool. And this kind of leads into my recommendation for everyone. So with a lot of micro settings, like Willow is one that I really like. If you folks don't know about Willow, Willow is a grim micro RPG setting that I think is really great. But these little settings you could take and insert into any world. So if you're working in the Forgotten Realms and your characters are in Waterdeep, you take this food alley and you just stick it in there because they're small and inconspicuous, right? Or say, oh, we're in 10 Towns, food alley right there. Right? And everybody congregates there because it's the only warmth that they get because of the whole Rime of the Frost Maiden story. And that's kind of what Steve and I did with our characters in Does It Roll? Or we're on like this big ship traveling across the sea, and instead of a food alley, it's literally food stalls on like one level of the ship. Or instead of food stalls, they're individual merchants who are traveling around, and they've just decided to start cooking on the ship. Right? So if you make it a location rather than like it's a traveling festival, you can insert it into more things.
Mm-hmm.
I did a similar thing in a few of my campaigns, but so I mean, this is kind of like how I practically approached this fantasy food issue when I was running Ghosts of Saltmarsh for my girlfriend, actually, the campaign where the lizard folk apparently eat halflings. But my girlfriend's a tremendous cook, like she loves cooking, and so I wanted to include a portion of the game that kind of appealed to food and food preparation. And so it's a game for her and her best friend, and so it's just me DMing a game for two people. So I had them go to an inn that is run by gnomes, and I've also taken this concept and injected it to some of my other games. And these gnomes, like in my games, I kind of stole the idea from Pathfinder lore that gnomes are from like the Feywild, the first world. They have some unique magic about them, and everything they do is kind of infused with magic. And so what I actually did is I had them infuse the menu with all these intricate kinds of magic from the Feywild. And actually, there's a game called Dragon's Crown, which is, made by former developers who worked on the D&D arcade games back in the day. And if you Google Dragon's Crown food, the game has like a food mechanic where like in between missions you rest up and you eat food. And so I actually like printed out a picture of what's in the game and a menu and said, here are the menu options you can choose from, all prepared by these gnomish cooks. And then each one of them had a mechanical effect if they decided to eat them. For example, this could perhaps give you temporary hit points. This could raise your armor class for 24 hours. So that was a way to kind of inject more flavor into the idea of returning to this place to eat this special cuisine that was magically infused and could also benefit certain, it had certain mechanical benefits from a gameplay perspective. And you could do that with like a gnomish inn. You could probably do that with like a food alley. You could do that with like a little traveling food merchant. Like, I think that's a great idea for a game.
It's also like overall, it creates one of those spaces where you can have any NPC show up and have it make sense.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you want to have like a secret agent meeting in plain dayside, go to the food alley. Everyone else is there. It makes sense, right? And then you give the opportunity for your players to describe whatever they're ordering that day.
Yeah, so there's a great tool that I wanted to share. So I bought this. I'm going to share it in the chat. It's called Gourmet Street, Fantasy Street Food Adventuring. It's on itch.io. I highly recommend buying it because it's a small creator. But it's literally a fantasy setting it's just a whole bunch of tables for random food generation. So it has you roll a D100 and it's what's on the menu. So I have a D100 pulled up online, so I'm going to roll it. And I got a 30. So today's special is a dire boar chicharron. And what's the beverage? Let me roll again. I got a 60. The beverage is mulberry gin, and the condiment for your main, I got an 89, is a umeboshi. And then you could go and then you could find the chef. So what's the title of the vendor? So I got a, this one is rolling on a D20. So I just got Slick Louie, and this stall is called Fry of the Beholder. And like, so we're already generating really cool, quick ideas. And the quality is not diseased. It's not diseased. And it even gives you frequent customers. And this one is the City Watch.
Cool. That's
Right there.
cool.
So it's like, oh, Slick Louie. If you want to know things or you want to get some information, I know that the City Watch frequent Fry the Beholder. And the vendor's name is Slick Louie.
That's amazing.
Right there.
That's
And
dope.
just did a couple
Sweet.
die rolls. Right? $5. There are also really cool things in it. There are like factions that you can use. And they're ambiguous enough that you could use them anywhere. Like the new Gastra Alchemists. And they're a movement. They're basically the molecular gastronomy people. And then there's the classicists. And then there are like food creatures. This one's just called Gloop. And it's just so gloops are the creation of the Nuevo Gastro Alchemists and are marketed as multi-purpose food friends. A standard gloop, TM, is a colorless, flavorless dollop of gelatin that can fit in your open palm. Gloops are about as intelligent as an especially dim dog and seem to be incapable of any emotion beyond gurgling delight. If left alone, a gloop will slowly wobble its way to the nearest living thing and attempt to cuddle and or be eaten by it. Gloops, it's always gloops, ! TM. Gloops appear to find nothing more satisfying than their brief, weird existence than to be eaten. And it's cool, and it's like gloops. Hit die, 1 to 10, so they could be a big gloop or a small gloop. Appearance, a multicolored lump with wide staring eyes and a broad toothless smile. Wants, to be friends, to be eaten. Armor, none. And the best thing is his morale 12. So in like old school essentials, morale is something that you roll when a creature is reduced past half hit points, and it kind of dictates how much they want to stay in combat. 12 is the highest morale in like a game like Knave. So it's like they don't give a fuck. It's flubber.
Oh, gloops.
But then there are also magic items. They have froth goblins or wolf yeast. But there's this magic item that I really like. There's also a creature called the Prince of Cucumber Sandwiches. And it's if you eat the Prince of Cucumber Sandwiches, you have to make a save against this curse, or you will be unable to gain nourishment from any food source save for fancy cucumber sandwiches until the curse is lifted.
Or like,
Pardon me, I'm just going to change my Twitter.
or like lifelong cucumber burps. If
Yeah.
anyone gets those.
But here's a cool magic item, and I thought this was really neat, and it didn't feel out of place or super exotic. And honestly, I was like, get out of my head, because this is something we talked about during the L5R stream. And and it always gets me when I try to say it, but it's the Rot Rock Walk. And it's a walk shaped from the very bones of the earth, probably by a dwarf or an elf trying to show off. The walk is around 6 feet in diameter and weighs over 1,200 pounds. And it's basically a giant walk designed to be used by a giant.
Cool.
But here's the cool thing. If the character is able to defeat the previous owner fair and square in a cooking contest, the character may lift and interact with the wok as though it were sized for them. When used to cook, the wok quadruples the number of servings created from added ingredients. The wok can be used as either a tower shield or as a hammer sized for a stone giant. And that's all it says. Like, I think that's
super cool.
really neat. And
Magical walk.
it's a magical walk that anybody can use, even though it's humongous. And the only way you can use it legitimately is if you win a cooking contest without cheating. Super
You
cool.
have a shield and a snack.
And yeah, like, I think that, like, what a fantastic tool, right?
Yeah.
It's brimming with flavor, literally. It's thought-provoking. It feels fantastical, but not at the expense of any cultures.
Yes.
And I think that's where Heroes Feast really hits the mark. Really hits the mark. They not only kind of create narratively create negative differences between their core races, the Dragonborns and the Halflings, but they also, have shit like Karatur noodles, which is literally like your cookbook has a recipe called Asian noodles. Who let that slip?
I mean, I think it's likely that someone came to them with the idea, and they ran with it, and so.
Oh yeah, totally. This is how I don't know if this is a Wizards of the Coast product. I should probably check that.
It's on their website. It's on Wizards' website, so I assume it was.
I think it's licensed by them. They don't.
Probably licensed by them, but it's not like it wasn't made by the D&D team.
Yeah.
I see.
So this is one of those missed opportunities where they could have made a legitimate supplement for their D&D world and a cookbook at the same time, but they didn't. And now we're going to.
Amazing.
That said, it's past 9:00. This is usually where our stream ends. But as usual, I want to, thank all of you for joining Agatha, Steve, and I for this episode of the Wrap Up. It's so great chatting, and I'm so happy that we were able to all sort of eat asynchronously, eat a meal together. I'm glad, Jeremy, that you got your meal.
Yes.
This meal's on Asians Represent, and we thank all of you who subscribe to our Twitch channel, watch our YouTube videos, help us get ad revenue. It helps us give back to our community, give back to people who produce content with us and tell stories and help teach all of you. So Emma, Anna-Malie, Jeremy, thanks for joining Steve, Agatha, and myself for dinner on this Friday night.
Yay!
I feel bad because we've made Monty and Sar so hungry for so many streams.
I know.
We didn't get to do this. So I'm so happy that you were able to join us for this one. I'm excited to have you on for future episodes of the Wrap Up because we'll never know what the topic's going to be. And thank you, people who watched us live and people who are watching us on YouTube. We really appreciate you, and the reception was so great to the first episode. If you want us to talk about a specific thing, or if there's something that happens in the TTRPG world that we miss, there are two ways that you can let us know. The first one is via social media. You can follow us, obviously on Twitch, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Twitch at AZNS Represent, Twitch at AZNS Rep, and YouTube at AZNS Represent. You can also find us on Twitter. But another way to join in the conversation, to let us know what you want to hear on the watch or watch on the Wrap Up, is by joining our Discord. So whenever we stream, we have two new mods, and they just happen to be here. Anna-Malie wielded power very fiercely the other day. Perhaps too fierce though. But I want to say thank you, Anna-Malie and Emma, for joining our team as mods. But whenever we get new mods for our Discord server, we open up new membership opportunities. So the second way that you can get in touch with us and kind of join the conversation is to join our Discord. So I think somebody, Steve, wow.
Or you beat the mod.
You beat the mod, Drew, slacking. But join our Discord. We only make those Discord links available during our live stream, so tune in Friday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern to join. Last thing, Emma, Anna-Malie, Jeremy, you got anything that you want to share, pitch, shout out, anything you got going on? Except Emma being the pioneer of the yarn punk.
Yeah,
sort
all
of
that yarn
genre.
punk going on. I did finish 2 pairs of socks this week, and also finished doing a cultural consultation this week. That was
Nice.
good.
Oh, busy. Damn.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you don't have anything to share, follow these folks: Starchiologist, Werewolf Fields, Pixel Grotto. Go to pixelgrotto.tumblr.com. Anna-Malie, you've written for a whole bunch of TTRPG things. If you are looking for a cultural consultant who specializes in Japan, hire Emma, Starchiologist. You got I pointed this way. Steve, best-selling author, unbreakablerpg.com. Agatha, there we go. Agatha, putting with my thumb. Agatha, amazing human being, co-host of the Asians Represent podcast, Emmy Award winner, cultural consultant, the mightiest of all the shrimps. This has been the wrap up, and thank you folks for joining us on this Friday, or if you're watching it later on YouTube. Bye, everyone.
Bye.